Hello, hello. Welcome to the PG-ish podcast. I'm Erin, a corporate marketing manager by day, podcast host by night, and single mom to 2 young daughters 24/7. In short, PG-ish parenting is the cliff notes to personal growth as a parent. Since those kiddos are always watching and learning from the adults in their life, like you, PG-ish is parenting guidance-ish to support a life worthy of imitating. Welcome and enjoy. I'm not quite sure how it's almost the end of January, but if you had a New Year's resolution at the beginning of the month, your excitement around it may be waning, if you haven't quit already. Research shows that 23% of people quit their resolution by the end of the first week of January, and 43% quit by the end of the month. According to Forbes, if you fall in the camp of the 48% that set improved fitness goals or the 36% prioritizing improved mental health, well, where do you stand today? Today's discussion is particularly important for those committed to fostering healthy habits as part of their resolutions. Before we jump in though, if health and wellness is on your mind, check out our sponsors. Last year, I started using daily gem vitamins and I'm still obsessed. This real food multivitamin is not only bite-sized so you can skip all of the pill popping, but they're also delicious. I've been using the citrus ginger and it has the right amount of zinc and all of my daily needs to stay healthy, like vitamin D, zinc, pro and prebiotics, and B vitamins. The health coach in me from a previous life of mine is oh so happy. Head to the link in the show notes to save 50% off of your first order. And if mental health or general therapy is needed this season, I highly suggest BetterHelp Online Therapy, who will support you in prioritizing your mental health and well-being. We all know that any season, not just the holiday season, can be a source of tension and stress, but you don't have to navigate it alone. Take a simple quiz to match with the most suitable therapist for you within 24 hours so that you can begin the healing journey or simply have a safe place to vent. BetterHelp's app is also an easy and all-in-one spot to journal, text with your therapist, and join discussions on a host of topics. BetterHelp is affordable and convenient. Save 10% with the code PGISH. That's PGISH. Finally, don't miss out on my Weary to Revived course. This course is a result of being on the other side of burnout, fatigue, grief, and frustration. Now, I am not perfect nor a fairy godmother with a magic wand to erase all of your problems. I'm just a mama standing in front of a weary mama asking her to join me. Take my hand and let me support you in creating a blueprint to feel, heal, and redefine joy and life on your own terms. It can be taken anytime and anywhere. To learn more and to sign up, head to my website, pgishparenting.com/classes-events. Again, check out links to our sponsors and the Weary to Revive course in the show notes. All right, diving back into today's episode. For years, I've geeked out on the mind-body connection, epigenetics, and so forth. I find this information just simply fascinating. And if it's new to you, I hope it's equally as interesting. Today, I feature Dr. Gabor Mate, a physician with a background in family practice, specializing in childhood development, trauma, and the potential lifelong impacts on both physical and mental well-being. Beyond being a speaker, he is a best-selling author known for his candid and straightforward assessments on societal issues. Personally, I find his insights not only enlightening, but also empowering, urging individuals from diverse backgrounds to reassess ingrained narratives and embark on a more successful journey toward healing. While I encourage you to listen to the full talk, today's highlight revolves around stress, disease, family, and the social and cultural foundations, including the role of women in American society. He explores how women often absorb most of the family stressors and emphasizes the transformative power of connection, especially in our fractured and highly independent American society. All right, check out Dr. Gabor Mate.
The infant's brain requires the mature function of the adult's brain to regulate it. I'm quoting Dr. Dan Siegel, a UCLA psychiatrist and child development expert. So the infant's brain requires the mature function of the adult's brain to regulate itself. But what if the adult's brain is not functioning maturely because that adult themselves never got the right conditions for the healthy development? Now you have an immature adult's brain regulating or trying to regulate an immature infant's brain. So that self-regulation never develops. And when you stress parents, well, for example, I mentioned asthma. when you stress parents, that affects the child's physiology. Because, let me step back a bit. I'll follow the because with an explanation, but let me step back a bit for a minute. Western medicine, the medicine in which I was trained, separates the mind from the body. So, in the Western medical mind, and I'll prove this to you in a minute, certain questions just don't arise. So, I'm going to just ask you in this audience, if in the last 5 years you've been to any kind of a specialist, otolaryngologist, a throat specialist, or a ear, nose, and throat specialist, or a gastroenterologist, or a cardiologist, or a neurologist, or a rheumatologist, or a dermatologist, just raise your hand, would you? Okay, so quite a few people here. Now, raise your hand again if your ologist of any kind asks you about your childhood relationship with your parents. Anybody? Nobody so far? Okay, ask you if they've ever been traumatized. Did they ever ask you that? Anybody ask you how you feel about yourself as a human being? What is your self-concept? Do you like yourself? Do you not like yourself? Did they ask you about stress on the job? Did they ask you about that maybe? Nobody? Right. Because the Western medical mind separates the mind from the body. And so when you come in with a physical problem, that's all it is. It's a physical problem. The fact that the mind and body are inseparable, not only are they inseparable theoretically, they're inseparable in practice. And not only are they inseparable, we actually have the science that shows exactly how inseparable they are. It's not like this is voodoo medicine. This is up-to-date science. Despite the fact that the science shows the unity, practice cleaves them into two. And not only do we separate the mind from the body, the emotions from the physiology, we also separate the individual from the environment. But let's go back to the example of the black woman who experiences racism, thereby increasing her risk of asthma, or the infant or the young child whose parents are stressed and therefore they're more likely to have asthma. We see, number one, that emotions can't be separated from the physiology because somehow erase this episode increases the chance that your lungs will be inflamed and your airways will be narrowed, which means the emotion, whatever you experienced, probably suppressed rage or shame, whatever you experienced, actually affects the physiology of your lungs. And if your parents are stressed, that also affects the physiology of your lungs. In other words, the separation is unscientific and it's untenable in real life. But that also leads to another question. Why are so many parents so stressed these days? What's happening culturally and socially? And furthermore, if you look at that asthmatic Afro-American woman, is that asthma a manifestation of her own pathology? Or is it reflecting a social malaise? In which case, her lungs are simply reflecting a historical problem in this country. In other words, the separations are illegitimate and they are non-scientific. They're ideological rather than real. And this isn't a new idea. The Buddha said 2,500 years ago, he talked about what he called the interconnected co-arising of phenomena. The interconnected co-arising of phenomena. He was simply saying that everything is connected to everything else. He said, contemplate all the conditions near and distant. He says, look at a leaf or a raindrop, and contemplate all the conditions near and distant necessary for the existence of that leaf or raindrop. Obviously, you look at a leaf, it contains the sun, the photosynthesis, the effect of light. Obviously, without the sun, there'd be no leaf. The sky, from which the water falls that irrigates the plant, that then produces the leaf, and the earth, the minerals and the nutriments and the materials that make up the substance of the leaf. So that leaf contains the earth, the sun, and the sky. And Buddha said, every phenomena depends on the existence of all other phenomena. He said, without the many, there cannot be the one, and without the one, there cannot be the many. if you look at parental stress, it's not an individual phenomena either. Contemplate all the conditions near and distant that lead to that parent being stressed. So it so happens that Puerto Rican kids in Chicago have higher rates of asthma than other ethnic groups. They also happen to have families that are more stressed than other families. Now, is that an individual family problem, or does that reflect a social problem? In other words, what I'm saying to you is that there's no condition of human beings, physical or mental, virtually, I mean, there are some exceptions, but virtually no condition of human beings that we call pathology that does not reflect a social and cultural background and issue. And we can't understand any of this without looking at the larger picture. And it's very interesting. Medicine is very interesting that way. If you go to a dermatologist with an inflamed skin, what kind of cream are they going to give you? Anybody know? Steroid cream, right. If you go to a rheumatologist with an inflamed joint, what medication are they going to give you? Steroid very often. If you go to a lung specialist with asthma, what kind of inhaler are you going to get? Steroid. If you go to a gastroenterologist with inflamed intestines, what kind of medication are you going to get? Steroids. Now, what are steroids? They're copies of cortisol. What is cortisol? It's a stress hormone. We're treating everything with stress hormones. Maybe it should occur to us that stress has something to do with the onset of these conditions. And that stress is not an individual problem. Stress is a social problem. And so if we're seeing more of this or that condition, let's consider that we're looking at the manifestations of something in the culture. To go back to multiple sclerosis, for example, why women? Well, what if we understood, which is my perspective, that it's very much a stress-driven condition. And it's very much a disease of people who take on too much stress in their lives unwittingly. Well, let's look at the situation as for women. What has changed from 7 years ago? Women have always had the roles of being the ones who absorb the stresses and problems of their families, including their spouses. So when you see the number of women who are getting anti-anxiety or antidepressant medications being many more historically than those of the men, does that reflect the weakness of the woman? Or does it actually reflect the fact that the woman is absorbing the stress of both people in the relationship very often? But that's their cultural role, and their whole family. Well, that hasn't changed. That's still the case. But on top of that, women now have to either choose to, or have to in many cases, play an economic role as well. They have to have a career, jobs, and so on. Which should be okay and even beneficial if the other role was shared equally. But it isn't. Women still largely have the role of being the stress absorbers of their larger families. And there's more stress than there used to be, because there's less connection. Now, Dr. Stephen Porges, who has done brilliant work on the nervous system, he points out that safety is not a question of a lack of threat. Safety is the presence of connection. Now, in this society, there's much less connection than there used to be, for all kinds of reasons, which I don't have to go into, but I mean, it's obvious. And if you read my book on addiction, you know that there's a particular store in Vancouver where I would shop for classical music in a very addicted fashion. And it's a beautiful store. No, it really is a beautiful store. It's magnificent, large, tall ceilings, and the staff are so musically knowledgeable and friendly, and such a great atmosphere in there. There's all kinds of recordings from decades ago so that you can get anything ever recorded almost. And yeah, I spent a lot of money there and in a very addicted way, but that's not the store's fault. But that store is closing now. The news just came out a couple of weeks ago. Second to last classical music store in Canada. I don't think you have any left in the United States, because online and digital technology has thrown them out of business. Now, what does that mean? That means that that person who wants to buy music now doesn't go to a store, doesn't talk to a human being, isn't in a human environment. They sit in the isolation of their home and they push buttons on a machine. There's less and less connection. So what I'm saying is, multiple sclerosis women, their role have doubled, but there's less connection, so there's more stress. Because if I stressed you right now, for example, it'd be a very different matter if you were by yourself and nobody to share with than if a friend of yours next to you says, "Hey, how are you feeling?" As soon as they ask you how you're feeling, your stress level goes down. So the lack of connection leads to increased stress. And there was a very interesting Australian study that showed, they looked at a number of women who had lumps suspicious for breast cancer, so they had to have biopsies. And they put these women through a psychological questionnaire before the results came back. And after the results came back, it turned out that if a woman was emotionally isolated, that by itself did not increase the risk of that lump being cancerous. Similarly, if a woman was stressed, that by itself did not increase the chance of that lump being cancerous. But if a woman was stressed and emotionally isolated, the risk of that lump being cancerous was 9 times as great as the average. And the physicians and the scientists who did the study, of course, couldn't understand this because they said, how does 0 and 0 add up to 9? 0 effect, 9. What? But to go back to our example here, if you, my friend, were stressed right now, which means there were high levels of stress hormone in your body, cortisol and adrenaline, but a friend of yours next to you said, "Hey, how are you feeling? Do you want to talk about it?" Your stress level will go right down. But if you're emotionally isolated and you were stressed, then your cortisol level will stay high for a long time, and cortisol suppresses the immune system, which means that a malignancy is more likely to develop. Which means that cancer is not the disease of the individual. The development of cancer in an individual reflects a lifetime history of relationships to family and to the culture and to society. Which then might explain to us, for example, why, if you look at, again, Black Americans are more likely to get prostate cancer and more likely to die of it, and not because of lack of medical care. And Black women are more likely to die of breast cancer, even if they have access to good medical care. But why is that? Well, maybe there's something about being a minority in this particular culture that is so highly stressful that it deranges the immune system. So is it an individual problem again, or is it a social problem? It's also true that in some very high economically advantaged areas, I think in Marin County, for example, amongst well-to-do white women, there's a high breast cancer rate. Maybe they're very stressed in a different way. And maybe they're isolated emotionally. Maybe that's what's driving it. So what I'm saying is, you can't separate the mind from the body. You can't separate the individual from the environment. And the only way to look at human beings is, as somebody once called, 41 years ago, an American physician called for what he described as a biopsychosocial view of human beings, which is to say that the biology can't be separated from the psychology, and that can't be separated from the social environment. Some American physicians a couple of years ago put out a paper where they called for what they call the biopsychosocial ecological point of view. When we also look at the ecology with which we're interacting. And that's obvious because, again, if you look at women who live in more blighted neighborhoods where there's more pollution in the air, when they're pregnant, their kids are more likely to have learning problems and behavior problems and so on, related to the degree of pollution that they inhaled when they were pregnant.
Okay, that might have been a lot to digest as he covers a lot of ground fast. But the importance of this talk is that life and the roles you play aren't black and white. Because you're connected to so many more things than you may give credit to, it may be worth your while to slow down, be present, take time to de-stress, and connect more than you already do. Not only for your health, but for the health of your family and society. So, what can you drop the ball on today? Who can you call or visit with? Or what will help you put down your phone? I'm sure I could ask you a lot more questions and take this a lot farther, but I know that this was a little bit longer than normal, so I'm just going to let you sit with this for a minute and digest it. If you enjoy Dr. Mate, you can find links to his website at drgabormate.com and to the full talk, The Myth of Normal and the Power of Connection in the show notes. If you like this kind of information, I suggest you listen to PGish episode 143, titled Who Really Has a Learning Problem, featuring Dr. Mate. Also episode 249, How to Rewire Your Brain to Your Better Self, featuring Dr. Joe Dispenza. Or episode 182, How to Stay Calm, featuring Dan Siegel, who Dr. Gabor Mate referenced. Remember to also check out the links to our sponsors, Daily Gem, Vitamins, and BetterHelp, as well as my Weary to Revived class in the show notes. All right, my friend, if this resonated with you, DM me on Instagram at PGish Parenting, share this episode with a bestie, push the subscribe button on your favorite podcast platform, or leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts so that more parents can grow alongside their kiddo like you. Sending you so much love. See you next time.